Alright, so we're going to pick up right where we left off, and we're going to stick with this Hello World app here as we kind of pick from there. So if you remember, last time we ran this, and we had a couple things I wanted to point out. So first of all, our primary stage gets its name right from here. It comes in that public void start. Okay. Now notice too, we then added, we have a stage, we put a scene on the stage, we put a root pane in there, and then in our pane we added our different elements. Now notice here, just up in the left hand corner, we didn't put any kind of formatting there. First thing we'll do, we're going to add, we're going to say pane dot set alignment, and you notice it says it takes a position, so we're just going to do pos dot center, and it comes right in there. And now when we run this, you're going to notice that our pane is now, everything is kind of centered in that one pane. Remember too, we said we were using this vertical box, and what that does is it basically puts in all of our different elements and stacks them vertically. So if I put in a third element, they would just kind of be stacked right on top of each other. We'll get into more of that later when we talk more about alignment of different things. Okay, now we're going to make a couple changes, and what we're going to do is we're going to add a click counter to our Hello World, and we're going to change this here to say click counter. Again, that is our title. It could kind of be anything you want, but we're just going to call it click counter. And what we're going to do is add a button, and every time I click the button, it's going to kind of increment that counter up. Okay. Now when we do this, we actually are going to have a separate static method that we're going to use, and so we're going to take a couple of these items and put them outside of our method here. So I'm just going to move them up. So my label is going to get defined outside. I'm just going to have one label, so we'll just call it label. I'm going to add a button, and I'll call it add button. Later on, you guys are going to have an assignment where you're going to add another button, so I'm just going to call that add button for now. Now again, notice I have an AWT and a JavaFX. Make sure you're always clicking the JavaFX import. Okay. Now my text here, I'm just going to say clicks, and I'm going to have a click counter plus click counter. We haven't created that click counter yet, and again I'm going to put it out here, so int click counter, and I'm going to initialize it down here as a 0 value. Okay, now we're not going to use label 2. Okay, and this we're going to put as label. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create our button. So our button is pretty straightforward. Button, we're going to call it, well, we already gave it that name, so we're going to do add button equals new button. And it's going to be similar to how we did our label. We can give our button a text, set text, and we'll call it add one. Okay, now again, we go back to our vertical panel here. We're adding our label. Now instead of label 2, we're going to do our add button. And they go in the order that I put them. So if I want the button first, I would put the button on top and add it first. Otherwise, I'm going to put it second, so it's going to be below. Now if I run this, you notice I have my clicks equals 0. I have a button, and I can push the button, but nothing happens right now. Okay, so we're going to change that. And what we're going to do is we need to basically say, okay, what happens when I click the button? And so this is an event. And so the way we do our event, we're going to say set on action. Oops. Okay, and now it says it's looking for an event handler. Well, we can create a whole new class to handle our event, or we can do what we call an anonymous subclass, which gets a little bit confusing and has a couple things in it that are a little bit odd. And so starting in Java 8, we can use what we call a lambda. And a lambda basically handles a single action interface, such as an event handler. And I create my lambda by basically taking the event, and I have this dash and a greater than sign that creates like an arrow, and then I can tell it what I want to do. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a method called button clicked, and I'm going to pass it that event. Okay, and that's it. So I'm basically taking the event when it happens, and I'm passing it off with this lambda to say run this method. Now I don't have that method yet, so if I hover over it, it's going to say create method button, click on action. Okay, and it's going to take me and create that event down here. Now this main method here, or this start method, is pretty much complete. I just now have to kind of finish this part here. Now my private object, I'm going to have a void return, so I can change that. And now I'm calling this button clicked, and it's really only handling the add button at this point in time. But like I said, you're going to have an event where you're going to create a subtract button, or an assignment to create a subtract button. And so I'm going to show you how we can kind of use this one event for both of these afterwards. Now when I click that button, this event essentially is recording and passing me a whole bunch of information. One of the pieces of information that it's passing me is which button actually sent it here. And so I can actually look at that logic and see what it is. So I'm going to say event.getSource. And so basically saying, you know, what was it that sent me here? If that equals my add button, then what do I want to do? Well, then I want to go back and I'm going to basically add one to my click counter. So I'm going to say click counter plus plus. Now unfortunately, when I increment my click counter, it doesn't actually change my screen. I have to reset my text to my screen, and so I'm going to do that again. And again, that's part of the reason why I created my label outside up here, so that it is universal and I can reference it right down here. So I'm going to say label.setText, and it's going to be basically the same thing I did before. So click, clicks, plus click counter. So every time I click it, my counter increments by 1, and I update my label accordingly. Now let's try that out. So I run it, I click 1 to add one, and it goes up. Okay, that's all for this video. From here, you guys are going to take a look at how can we add another button, how can we decrement that, how can we put a couple of these pieces together, and go from there.